question from the crowd. Our current Congress is completely dysfunctional. What would you do to make sure things get done, and would you work with the other party in compromise? We'll do 1 minute for this question since we're getting close. And Andrew, we will start with you.
Good question. You know, my model, my hero, my personal political hero, was a guy named Jack Kemp. Jack Kemp was a congressman from upstate New York, and he was a principled conservative. He never deviated from his principles as a conservative. But Jack Kemp wrote groundbreaking legislation. The Economic Recovery Act of 1981 was written with Bill Roth, a Democrat. And so to me, the model in Congress today is the problem, the reason I think Congress is so broken is that we have a class of professional politicians who are more concerned about re-election than they are about service. And we need a return to citizen representation. We need people who are going to Washington as a calling, not as a profession, not as a way to make money, and are going there to get work done. Stick to your principles. If you're a conservative, be a principled conservative, and get the work done for the people.
Will?
You know, when I first was interested in running for this job, I went down to DC and talked to some members. Chris Gibson was one of them, and I asked them, you know, is this country and this Congress really as bitterly partisan and divided as the media makes it out to be? And they said very simply, it's worse. It's worse than that. We probably live in the most divided politics since the reconstruction of the Civil War. And it is an entirely fair question to ask any one of us, what the heck do you expect to accomplish in this climate? You know, all I can say is that you have to focus on the common ground that you can find. When I think of issues that I can work with Republicans on, I look to infrastructure, I look to some clean energy issues, I look to tax reform, and you build personal relationships and work across the aisles as hard as that work sounds. There's no easy shortcut. I have spent my whole political career working with Republicans in the town of Livingston, and I've still managed them to pass things that they wouldn't initially support, like banning hydrofracking and helping other towns to do the same, supporting our cultural and historic resources, and developing our solar resources. It's the hard work of government. There is no shortcut. It starts with personal relationships and experience.
Bob?
Congress is dysfunctional. I think we all agree on that. So that's one thing that both parties agree on. There's a lot of other things we agree on. And what we disagree on sometimes is just how we get there. We all love our country. Common Core's got to go. I think my fellows over here would agree with that. The budget needs to be balanced. I think we all know that has to happen. Infrastructure that was built in the 50s that is now falling apart needs to be upgraded so we can get our economy moving. There are a lot of things that we can agree on. On the other hand, there are things that we firmly believe are our conservative values or liberal values that you send us to Washington to stick by, and we will stick by that. Second Amendment rights, I'm pro-life, and I'm for a balanced budget. Those are the things that I won't compromise on. But I'll find areas to compromise on things that benefit us all.
John?
I do think Chris Gibson, who a friend of mine who I've known for 30 years, is a model for working across the aisle. I have always worked across the aisle in terms of when I was in elective office. I last was in elective office 13 years ago, but I'm proud of the fact that I worked on many different issues and worked across the aisle. I think a perfect example of where we can have bipartisan cooperation is on the issue of heroin abuse and prescription opioid drug abuse. I think that's an area which doesn't discriminate whether you're a Democrat or Republican, rural or urban, male or female. It doesn't matter what color you are. Heroin abuse is a plague upon our communities, and that's something that I laid out a plan. You can see it on my website early on in this campaign, and I think that's an area. I've heard President Obama speak about it. I've heard other people on the Democratic side speak about it. I've heard Republicans give me their testimonials, and Democrats as well throughout this district. So that's a perfect example of where I think we could work together to fix problems. And if we don't fix the overriding economic problems, this country is going to be broke in about 10 years. And that's an area where I hope we can agree on as well.
So I have always also worked across the aisle. I was the national director of the Sunlight Foundation, and I worked with the Heritage Foundation and Cato, and focusing on making federal contracting database public. I think if you know who you are and what you care about, it's actually really easy as long as you're gracious. Mike Huckabee's former digital director is telling everybody he knows that they should vote for me because he knows I'm serious about corruption. And Mark McKinnon, a key advisor to George Bush, has been supportive of my campaign because he knows I'm serious about corruption. I can do that. But I want to say two other things. One is, I don't think I fit into an easy box, and I don't think most people do either right now. I don't think people feel connected to the political parties. They don't necessarily feel like they're heard. So I don't think we should be putting people in simple boxes. But the deep question behind the questioner is about this crisis in Washington and in our country, which is so real. The average Congress member now spends between 30 and 70% of her time fundraising. That is grotesque. We have to change that. We have to bring back this country for, by, and of the people.
We'll do one or two more quick questions, and then we'll end with the closing remarks. One contentious issue as of late in Congress has been on trying to come up with a national GMO labeling standard, especially as Vermont prepares to enact its own statewide policy. Those in favor of biotechnology say it can reduce the demands for water, pesticide use, and ensure stability of entire crops like the papaya in Hawaii. The other side, there is a lot of confusion and fear associated with biotechnology. What is your view on the use of this important technology in food production? And would you support a science-based approach to the labeling of GMO products? We'll do 1 minute for this question, and it is Andrew's turn to begin. Oh, I'm sorry, Will's turn. I apologize.
So I'm trained as a biologist. That's my primary academic experience. And so one of the things I always try to break with my progressive colleagues on this is all the time if we as Democrats are complaining that the Republicans are ignoring the science of climate change, I think we have to be very clear about what the science of GMOs are. I don't think GMOs across the board are harmful. I think there's a potential for good in that research to develop crops that are more drought resistant, that use less water and less land, and that we shouldn't wholesale reject that technology when there are real environmental benefits that come from it. Along with that come the right of consumers to know exactly what they're buying. And I think the question is the model that we use to help pay for that. For example, we have a system where producers certify organic products, and then they label that product as organic, and then get a value-added price for that. I would support the labeling of GMO if we label those products that are GMO-free so that those individuals can get a value-added bump for the cost of certifying those products.
Bob?
I think we need a national GMO labeling standard. I think people who are concerned need to know. I read food labels on everything I buy, but we don't need 50 separate GMO labeling protocols. We have to have a national one. We can't have, even though I'm all for states' rights, this is one situation where we need to have a national labeling program. Because if I'm a food processor and I'm selling to a dozen different states, I can't have a dozen different types of packaging. So whether you agree with GMO or not, I think labeling is a good idea. It doesn't do any harm. It just has to be a national label. And an example is I work for one of the largest certified organic farms in the country. We ship hay to China. China uses a PCR test, which will test GMO at 0.001. In the US, we use a strip test, which tests at 0.015. We're sending certified organic alfalfa to China that is getting false positives. So we have to have a uniform standard so we're all talking the same language.
John?
In the spirit of bipartisan cooperation, I'll associate myself with Will's remarks and also with Bob's remarks. The fact is that we do need a national standard. The consumers do have a right to know. On the other hand, it's important that we not stand in the way of progress, particularly as it affects countries around the world, in Africa, for instance, where drought-resistant and pest-resistant seed is literally saving millions of lives, and we should not close our eyes to that. Let me also say that, and Bob piqued my interest on this, back to this trade issue, the Chinese just have been accused by U.S. Steel of industrial espionage recently, just in the last few days, where they're stealing prototypes of a new carbon-based thin steel, which is essential for the production of automobiles for fuel efficiency. So one of the things we have to do with trade is we have to not close ourselves to the rest of the world, but we really have to enforce vigorously and aggressively standards against industrial espionage, like we're seeing all too frequently from China.
Summer?
I also believe in a national standard. I also want to add two things, one that hasn't been raised before, so thanks for, we're sharing some of our minutes. Monsanto owns as much as 80% of the soy and corn seeds in this country. That's a problem because of what that means for power. I believe that people should have power and farmers should have power, and they should have a lot more freedom than they do. This comes from an aggressive Supreme Court and a few companies that are basically trying to gain control over a handful of farmers through owning their seeds. So I think that's a separate but related issue that we should really focus on. And in general, I'm in favor of labor. I'm also in favor of country of origin labeling, which I think is really important. People should know where their